The Four Corner Hustlers aka 4CH were founded in the West Garfield Park neighborhood on the west side of Chicago in the 1960s by Walter Wheat and Freddie Gage. The Four Corner Hustlers at first were a single gang that would wear the colors black and brown, but was not in an alliance until the Vice Lords and the Four Corner Hustlers then became allies, which later formed the group now known as People Nation. The gang colors are black and gold, serving under Vice Lords. They associate themselves with a black diamond with points at each corner. The gang has a reputation to be the most violent and feared street gang in Chicago. There was indeed a time back in the year 1968 that two Vice Lord teenage boys had an idea of how to protect a certain area in the West Garfield Park neighborhood from invaders from outside the area that threatened the neighborhood with drug dealing, gang banging and violence. The idea of the Four Corner Hustlers was one thing, neighborhood protection, and that did not mean only protection for their members but for everyone that lived in this territory. The territory was Madison Street and Pulaski Road, Independence Boulevard and Madison Street, Pulaski Road and Jackson Boulevard and Independence Boulevard and Jackson Boulevard and all the street corners in between including Jackson and Springfield, Springfield and Adams, Springfield and Wilcox, Springfield and Monroe, Springfield and Madison, Madison and Hamlin, Monroe and Hamlin, Hamlin and Wilcox, Adams and Hamlin, Jackson and Hamlin, Pulaski and Monroe, Pulaski and Wilcox and Pulaski and Adams. That is quite a bit of territory for a brand new gang, but 17-year-old Walter Wheat, who had just left the unknown Vice Lords, born April 11, 1951, and another Vice Lord named 15-year-old Marvin Evans made it happen. They organized it with another unknown Vice Lord, 15-year-old Freddie Gage, Richard Left Hand Goodman, and Monroe Money Banks and approximately 7 others. Freddie Gage would become second in command over this new organization. They formed a fighting gang, not a drug-dealing gang or a gang that destroyed their own neighborhood in protest and anger like the Vice Lords did back then. Instead, they were going to beat down any gang that came in there acting destructive. This idea was all put together at Delano Playground at the corner of Springfield and Wilcox. The Four Corner Hustlers had strict rules to abide by: no drug dealing, no drug using, not even marijuana, no mugging, no burglarizing, but shoplifting and stealing from delivery trucks was fully acceptable. Any violence inflicted on rival gangs was acceptable too: shooting, stabbing, cracking skulls, whatever needed to be done to show who was running those corners was acceptable. On February 14, 1972, Four Corner Hustlers and unknown Vice Lord gang members attended a Valentine's Day dance at 3906 Lexington Avenue, corner of Springfield and Lexington, at the Presentation Catholic Church. The dance was an invite-only situation, and Officer Henderson Arnold told everyone they must have a membership card in order to stay at the dance in the basement. 18-year-old Freddie Gage was one that did not have an invitation, and Officer Arnold told him to leave. When he refused, a struggle happened between the officer and Gage that resulted in Arnold's gun firing off, which caused a bullet to hit Officer Arnold in his face and neck. Afterward, Four Corner Hustler Leo Walker came up with his .22 caliber Derringer and started shooting at Arnold as well, while Freddie Gage and Walter Wheat tackled him, according to court documents. As Officer Arnold tried to escape, he was being shot at. Arnold survived and needed surgery to repair the damage. He was shot 3 times. It was at this point in time that Frederick King Freddie Gage now was sentenced to do 10 years in prison for this attempted murder, and it was at this point in time that the Four Corner Hustlers were first documented. However, they were not widely known. People vs. Walker, 1975. Even though Four Corner Hustlers were violent as could be and were heavily into robbing trucks and stores, they were not a heavily organized conglomerate with thousands of members like the Black Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, Black P. Stones or Latin Kings. The Four Corner Hustlers remained rather small in size and did what they needed to do to protect their turf and to hustle and make money without resorting to destroying the neighborhood with drugs. That was the job of rivals like the Vice Lords and nearby Black Gangster Disciples. Around about 1975, Walter Wheat was sent to prison for aggravated assault and other charges. He was to spend over 10 years in prison. At this point, without King Wheat or King Freddie, the Four Corner Hustlers began to be slowly seduced by the lull of the heroin trade that was forbidden by Walter Wheat and Freddie Gage. Around this time, the Black Souls were getting larger in number in West Garfield Park and wanted to expand their drug trade. The new Black Soul leader was Wayne Jack Bobo Edwards, and he was looking for a new opportunity at Monroe and Pulaski. This corner was original 4CH territory, but Jack Bobo was looking to make some profits. He offered to operate here respectfully, as they would team up against the Vice Lords or any black gangster disciples that came into the area. This was the creation of the 440+ concept that united Four Corner Hustlers and Black Souls to create Mad Black Souls. This was a small start for Four Corner Hustlers to be involved in the drug trade, although it was impossible for them to operate at a high level because it would fall under the radar of the imprisoned leadership. In 1977, leaders Walter Wheat, Monroe Banks, and Freddie Gage needed better protection while locked up in prison, so they drew up a truce with the Vice Lord Nation. This would stop all wars in prison and on the streets. On November 11, 1978, the People Nation Alliance was formed, and the Vice Lords were one of the main organizations to put it together and in charge of what organizations get in. The Four Corner Hustlers were fairly new of an organization and did not have much to offer the People Alliance as far as advancing the drug trade. Therefore, the Four Corner Hustlers joined the Vice Lord Nation while in prison as Vice Lord Branch. On the streets, this did not mean that fours were going around claiming Vice Lord. It only meant a change in colors from black and brown to black and gold and peace with Vice Lords, and it also meant a conversion to Islam, just as the Vice Lord Nation had done to unite with El Runes. As time passed and the 1980s rolled in, the Four Corner Hustlers were slowly slipping away from Walter Wheat's grasp, as him and Gage were still locked up and the fours were slowly engaging in more and more drug dealing. In late October of 1983, Freddie Gage was scheduled to be released from prison after his 10-year stint for attempted murder of a Chicago police officer on the Valentine's Day shooting in 1972. On the day before his release, he celebrated by drinking some bad moonshine that ended up killing him. He died at 29 years old. On November 1, 1983, a massive funeral service was put together for Gage, which brought 5,000 people to his funeral. The funeral consisted of many members of the Vice Lords and Four Corner Hustlers and several others. There was a massive line down Chicago Ave that caused one lane of traffic to be blocked, and police needed to direct the traffic. Chicago Tribune, January 8, 1984, pg 1. This story made the first page in the Chicago Tribune, but the funny thing is they called him a conservative Vice Lord leader and did not even mention the Four Corner Hustlers. This shows that the fours were not quite known yet in Chicago, but that would soon change. The first of the main founders of the nation, Freddie Al Malik Hoderi Gage, now was laid to rest. In 1985, Marvin Shorty Evans retired from the gang life and found religion, leaving just Walter Wheat and Monroe Money Banks as original leaders of the organization, but both were in prison. In 1986, Monroe Banks was released from prison after doing time for a 1975 charge of robbery, rape, and unlawful restraint. On November 17, 1975, Monroe Banks, Ray Surges and Philip Smith plotted to rob Jay Starks at gunpoint. After Starks gave up all his money, it was not enough, so Banks and the two others forced Starks into their trunk and took Starks to his house according to court documents. When they got to the house, Banks pistol whipped Starks and knocked him out while the three others robbed the house. Court documents show that Banks and Smith raped the wife and 14-year-old daughter. By the time Banks was on trial for these crimes, he was brought up on murder charges that same year and was sentenced to 15 to 30 years. People v. Surges, November 9, 1981. In the year 1986, Banks was released early out on parole. As soon as Banks hit the streets, he found the Four Corner Hustlers were selling drugs in small quantities and loving the money that came with it. Banks would show them a higher level of dealing that would make the fours richer than ever, with now the distribution of crack cocaine. He set up a complex drug operation and expanded Four Corner Hustler territory into the northern part of the Austin neighborhood, which was the beginning of the true growth of the Four Corner Hustlers. Right away drug profits began stacking up and Monroe Banks was living up to his nickname Money. He also created the black diamond symbol to represent the newfound profits and the new order. This was a hell of a come-up for the Fours, and this led to more violent behavior, so much that in the late 1980s, when Walter Wheat was released from prison, he did not recognize his Fours anymore and left the leadership to Banks. However, Wheat still had a major voice in the organization. During the later 1980s, as the Four Corner Hustlers got deeper embedded in the drug trade, is led to more violent crime convictions. The future leader of the Four Corner Hustlers, Angelo Roberts, was one member that caught up in a murder case alongside Four Corner Hustler co-founder Eugene Roy Nee. According to the court case of the People vs. Roy Nee, January 24, 1988, Chicago police found the dead body of Stephen Edwards found behind a Jewel grocery store located at 3552 West Grand Avenue in the West Humboldt Park neighborhood. The man was beaten to death and tied up with torn strips of bed sheets around his face, neck, hands, knees, and thighs. He cuts dug into his chest that caused lots of bleeding. It appeared Edwards had been kidnapped and tortured. The detectives then visited Edwards' address at 3841 West Adams in the West Garfield Park neighborhood, which is right in the middle of the original Four Corner Hustler territory. Edwards was living in the basement of this building and was a drug addict. The landlord was interviewed and gave permission for the police to enter the building and search the basement. They also spoke to Roy Nee. The police found evidence the murder happened in the basement, as the torn rags found on Edwards matched the bedspread that Edwards slept on in the basement. Roy Nee told police that Edwards had been accused by his girlfriend Carolyn Lewis of stealing from her and she wanted him to leave her alone. That's when she went to Roy Nee to help keep Edwards away. In another incident sometime later in the month, Edwards and another man were cooking cocaine and heroin in the basement when they broke out into an argument about how much drugs each of them would get. Roy Nee and Angelo Roberts said they came downstairs to break up the fight. Roy Nee and Roberts alleged they saw Edwards hit his partner with a stool, so Roy Nee hit Edwards with a lead pipe in the back of the legs and twice in the head, making it into a protection type of murder. Roy Nee originally stated that Edwards left with two men in a car after the argument, but later admitted he killed him but made it look accidental or justified. Forensic experts testified they found extensive evidence of repeated blows all over his body and found stab wounds in each lung. They also found evidence the man was tied up as he was beaten and stabbed. Roy Nee had said there was a party in the building and he happened to hear the commotion downstairs and came to discipline Edwards. However, it was later confirmed there was no party that day. It then became conclusive that the murder was planned and Roy Nee was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. His violent past perhaps did not help his case, because he was once convicted of murder in 1969 as well. Angelo Roberts wouldn't cooperate when interviewed by police, and he used his Fifth Amendment rights to not testify against Roy Nee, proving that Angelo Roberts was no snitch and was loyal to the organization. He also avoided charges of trying to conceal a homicide and unlawful use of a weapon. He was later suspected of shooting a police officer in 1990 but managed to dodge conviction. Source: UPI Archives, October 21, 1994. The way he handled this case enhanced his reputation greatly. Eugene Roy Nee is presently still in prison serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. These younger fours were a new breed of killer types that followed every teaching of Monroe Banks, and they modeled after him. Banks was known to be ruthless and very serious about not letting competition get in his way. This led to increased gang wars into the very early 1990s. This also led to the death of Monroe Banks in August of 1991. According to the History Channel's show Gangland, he was shot while watching a man try to get a cat down from a tree. Then a member of the Black Souls shot him dead. This murder would of course further intensified the wars with Black Soul factions. By the end of his reign, Banks was able to have the Four Corner Hustlers open up shop in the near West Side housing projects, the Henry Horner Homes, and the Rockwell Gardens Homes. He also took the Fours to the South Side to open chapters in the Woodlawn neighborhood, Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood, LeClaire Courts Homes by Midway Airport in the Garfield Ridge neighborhood at 43rd and Cicero Ave, Marquette Park neighborhood, Kenwood Neighborhood, South Shore Neighborhood, Roseland Neighborhood, and the West Pullman Neighborhood. The fours also grew into some Chicagoland suburbs and other states. After Monroe Money A. L. Ganny Banks was killed, the throne was wide open and Walter Wheat was not going to step back. Instead, he appointed his soon-to-be son-in-law Angelo Low Roberts to be the new leader of the organization. Low was only 21 years old but wanted to rule the nation badly, and the money and power that went with it. Wheat was hoping the father of his grandchild would bring the force to a more controllable level and smooth out operations. Roberts instead brought even more expansion than ever and opened up territory on the northwest side in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. This was a white neighborhood that was turning Hispanic, so he called these fours the Spanish Four Corner Hustlers. The Spanish Four Chs opened up on Lockwood Ave and immediately made new enemies that were not just folks but also went at it with the Taylor Justers and the Latin Pachucos. Angelo Roberts also made the organization no longer a gang for just blacks. Now all races could join up north and in the suburbs. This would of course grow the 4CH Army, numbering over 1,000 members in no time. Angelo also grew the organization in many other states like Atlanta, Georgia for example, that still pays homage to him. Roberts had also set up a complex drug operation in the Rockwell Gardens housing projects and the Henry Horner homes and was moving thousands if not millions of dollars worth of crack and heroin within these buildings. The Chicago police clamped down on him and did a major raid on his operation, which got Roberts in jail. Roberts was then hell-bent on revenge and wanted to send a message to the police and the whole world that if you bust in on his operation there will be major consequences. Roberts also had Walter Wheat breathing down his neck telling him what should be done, and others listened to Wheat and put Roberts in check. By 1994 Roberts despised this and saw Wheat as someone in the way of all that Angelo wanted to accomplish. When Roberts got out of prison in June of 1994 he began his escapades. On July 25, 1994 Angelo Roberts plotted on the death of Walter Wheat. On this Monday, July 25, 1994, 43-year-old Walter Wheat was sitting in a 1982 Oldsmobile Regency waiting for his friends to come back out as they were in a clothing store at the 3800 block of West Chicago Ave. As he sat there, a shirtless 17-year-old Bobby Cooley rode up on the car with a 9mm pistol and fired 2 shots into his back and the back of his head. The founder/leader and longtime leader behind the leaders of the Four Corner Hustlers was now killed by his own gang. By September, Cooley was apprehended and charged with another shooting as well. He is currently doing a life sentence for killing King Walter Albati Hoderi Wheat. Chicago Tribune. George Papa John, August 19, 1994. Roberts attempted to buy all the high-powered weapons in what he thought was a deal with drug dealers, as he attempted to buy a Laws anti-tank rocket in exchange for cash and drugs. It turned out he was trying to buy from ATF agents. Somehow there was no arrest at the scene because Roberts got suspicious and went into hiding for the rest of 1994. Roberts wanted to use this weapon to blow up the police headquarters at 3151 West Harrison St. on Chicago's west side for revenge for interrupting his drug operations in the housing projects. Chicago Tribune. Andrew Marden, January 17, 1995. On January 16, 1995 at 1 a.m. CPD found the body of Roberts at 7009 S. Vernon, 70th and Vernon, right near the Park Manor Apartments in the Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood. He was found with his throat slashed in the back of a brown Chevy. No one has ever been caught in connection for the murder, but it is rumored CPD may have done it, but that is not even close to verified. Chicago Tribune. Andrew Marden, January 17, 1995. After the death of Angelo Roberts, Ray Longstreet took over leadership of the Four Corner Hustlers. Eventually the Four Corner Hustlers would grow to have over 18,000 members. Many Four Corner Hustlers still pay homage to Angelo Roberts, Monroe Banks, and Walter Wheat. The Four Corner Hustlers would eventually grow to have over 10,000 members.